Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has detained two vessels in Gulf waters, with Iran's state media saying the vessels were carrying smuggled fuel, according to Iran's semi-official Tasnim news agency. The reporting did not specify the vessels' flags or the crew nationalities. Iranian authorities claim more than 1 million liters of smuggled fuel were found aboard the two vessels, according to Tasnim. The agency reports that 15 foreign crew members were handed over to Iranian judicial authorities for processing, according to the report. The vessels were intercepted near Iran's Farsi Island in the Persian Gulf, following what the guards described as months of surveillance and intelligence operations, according to the reporting. The detention comes amid escalating regional tensions as diplomatic talks between Iran and the United States approach in Oman. The vessels were intercepted near Farsi Island, where Iran has major naval presence. The timing, as both sides prepare for nuclear negotiations, adds context to the maritime operations in this strategically important area. The IRGC described its Gulf operations as comprehensive in a state-linked statement. Given the complete and comprehensive dominance of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the second naval district of the Persian Gulf, exercising its full authority and extensive oversight, became fully aware of the movements and transit of the two vessels involved in fuel smuggling operations, the statement said, according to Tasnim. Consequently, with a valid judicial order, these two vessels were apprehended and seized approximately within the designated operational zone of Farsi Island, the statement continued. The language reflects Iran's assertion of control over its territorial waters. Following a judicial order, the vessels were transferred to Bushehr, and a substantial quantity of over 1 million liters of smuggled diesel fuel was subsequently handed over to the National Iranian Oil Refining and Distribution Company, according to the IRGC statement. In connection with this incident, 15 foreign crew members from these two vessels were apprehended and are currently in the custody of the judicial authorities to complete the necessary legal procedures, the statement concluded. The emphasis on judicial procedures frames the detentions as law enforcement actions. Past seizures have been framed by Tehran as anti-smuggling, though some external analysts view them as messaging actions. Iran has repeatedly targeted vessels it accuses of participating in illicit fuel trade across the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, according to officials who say this is the latest in a series of similar vessel detentions in recent months. With fuel prices in Iran among the lowest globally, smuggling petroleum products to neighboring countries remains highly profitable, according to economic analysis. Iran's heavily subsidized fuel creates price differentials that drive cross-border trade. The Strait of Hormuz is a key energy route. Such seizures feed into broader regional maritime risk perceptions. Iran's ability to conduct operations in these waters affects global perceptions of shipping security in the Gulf. Iranian state media consistently frames these operations as legitimate law enforcement against smuggling networks. The economic incentives for fuel smuggling provide context for why such operations occur regularly in Gulf waters. Reports indicate elevated U.S. warnings and military movements in the region around the same time as the vessel detentions. The detention comes as tensions between Iran and the United States are once again high, according to the reporting. Diplomatic talks were close to collapse before both sides agreed to meet in Oman. Washington dispatched additional naval forces to the Gulf region, according to the reporting, while Iran continues conducting operations in the same waters. Both sides maintain military presence while preparing for negotiations. The vessel detentions can be read as Iran demonstrating that it continues normal operations in Gulf waters regardless of diplomatic developments. The message applies to both Washington and regional partners hosting U.S. forces. The timing, as nuclear talks approach, adds a diplomatic context to what Iranian state media presents as routine anti-smuggling enforcement. The operations occur against a backdrop of increased regional military deployments and diplomatic preparations. Some analysts and state-linked reporting offer scenarios about how conflict dynamics could unfold in the region. These projections begin with potential U.S. strikes targeting nuclear facilities, military installations, and IRGC bases across Iran. American air and missile strikes would rely on aircraft carriers, strategic bombers, stealth jets, and precision-guided munitions, according to these analytical frameworks. Advanced electronic warfare and hypersonic weapons would aim to overwhelm Iran's air defenses. Washington's approach would emphasize technological superiority to deliver decisive results, according to this analysis. However, these scenarios suggest Iran has prepared for survival through dispersed and hardened assets, including underground facilities and redundant command centers. The goal would be not to stop an initial attack, but to maintain retaliatory capacity according to these strategic projections. Most nuclear and military sites are located near populated areas, complicating targeting decisions in any potential conflict. Hypothetical strategic frameworks project how Iran might respond to military action. Within hours of any U.S. strike, these scenarios envision massive missile and drone operations targeting U.S. bases across the Middle East. Potential targets in these projections include Qatar's Al Udeid Air Base, facilities in Kuwait and the UAE, and U.S. positions in Syria and Iraq, according to analytical assessments. The strategy would aim to overwhelm missile defenses through volume rather than precision. The approach reflects Iran's understanding that it cannot match U.S. technological superiority in conventional terms, according to these analyses. Instead, projected strategies focus on imposing costs that make sustained conflict economically and politically difficult for Washington. These analytical frameworks present Iran not as an isolated actor, but as the center of a regional network that could transform any bilateral conflict into a multi-front situation across the Middle East. Hypothetical strategic frameworks project how regional proxies might react in a broader conflict, but these are scenario-based, not confirmed operations. Iran's regional relationships could potentially activate multiple theaters simultaneously. Hezbollah in Lebanon could potentially target Israel, according to these analytical projections. Houthi operations in Yemen might intensify attacks on Red Sea shipping routes. Iraqi militias with Iranian ties could potentially target U.S. troops and diplomatic facilities. These scenarios envision stretching American forces across multiple fronts simultaneously, creating a multi-theater challenge that would complicate U.S. response planning and resource allocation. The projections leverage Iran's decades of regional relationship building. Rather than facing the United States in isolation, these frameworks envision activating allied forces across multiple countries to create simultaneous pressure points. Analytical frameworks also project cyber dimensions of potential conflict. Iran could potentially launch cyber operations against transportation networks, energy systems, financial institutions, and military communications in various scenarios. The objective would be disruption and pressure on U.S. allies hosting American forces, according to these projections. Cyber operations could potentially target infrastructure in Gulf states, creating domestic pressure on governments supporting U.S. operations. However, these analyses note that U.S. Cyber Command has extensive offensive capabilities that far exceed Iran's. Any cyber conflict would create mutual vulnerabilities, with Iran's own infrastructure exposed to retaliation. The cyber dimension reflects how modern conflict scenarios extend beyond physical battlefields. Both sides maintain capabilities to disrupt critical infrastructure, creating complex calculations about escalation risks and responses. Iran's geographic position provides significant leverage in various conflict scenarios. The Strait of Hormuz, just 24 miles wide, carries over 20% of global oil shipments. Iran has repeatedly threatened closure in past crises. Economic models suggest disruptions in the strait could influence global markets, depending on severity. Various scenarios envision mining waters, targeting commercial vessels, or deploying naval assets to disrupt shipping flows. The economic dimension represents Iran's most significant asymmetric advantage in strategic calculations. Even without nuclear weapons, Iran's ability to affect global energy supplies provides deterrent leverage that influences decision-making in multiple capitals. The vessel detentions demonstrate Iran's operational capacity in these waters. While current operations target alleged smugglers according to Iranian reporting, they showcase naval capabilities that could affect broader shipping in different circumstances. Analytical frameworks suggest Iran's strategy emphasizes endurance rather than decisive victory. Iran cannot match U.S. conventional capabilities according to these assessments, but aims to impose costs that exceed American willingness to sustain them. The approach reflects lessons from Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts, where technological superiority did not translate into sustainable political outcomes, according to strategic analysis. Iran's projected strategy aims to reach cost thresholds that affect U.S. domestic political calculations. These frameworks assume democratic societies have limited tolerance for prolonged, expensive conflicts with unclear objectives. Iran's goal would be reaching that threshold before its own capacity for resistance is exhausted. However, conflict scenarios are inherently unpredictable, according to these analyses. What Iran might view as calculated pressure could potentially trigger overwhelming retaliation that exceeds all current projections. The vessel detentions should be understood within the broader context of regional tensions and competing interpretations. Iranian state media frames the operations as legitimate law enforcement against fuel smuggling networks. The operations serve multiple audiences with different potential interpretations. For Washington, they demonstrate Iran's operational capacity in critical waters. For regional partners, they illustrate the ongoing maritime security challenges in Gulf waters. For Iran's domestic audience, the detentions show effective action against smuggling that drains state subsidies. For the international community, they highlight Iran's role in regional maritime security enforcement. The timing, as nuclear talks approach, adds diplomatic context to what Tehran presents as routine enforcement operations. The question is whether current tensions affect how various actors interpret these maritime activities. The focus on fuel smuggling reflects genuine economic concerns for Iranian authorities. With domestic fuel prices heavily subsidized, price differentials with neighboring countries create significant arbitrage opportunities. Smuggling operations affect Iran's treasury by diverting subsidized fuel intended for domestic consumption to higher-priced foreign markets. The practice undermines energy subsidies and affects government revenues during a period of economic pressure. Iran's operations against smuggling networks serve both economic and strategic purposes. By demonstrating maritime monitoring capabilities, Tehran showcases surveillance systems that apply to various types of shipping activity. The legal framework provides justification for operations that might otherwise face different international characterizations. Iran can point to legitimate economic enforcement objectives while conducting maritime operations in strategic waters. Gulf states hosting U.S. forces face complex calculations about regional developments. Supporting American military preparations carries potential risks, while opposing Washington affects security partnerships. The vessel detentions remind Gulf governments that Iran maintains operational capabilities regardless of U.S. military deployments in the region. This reality affects their calculations about various policy options and regional positions. Recent reporting indicates Saudi Arabia and the UAE have declined to allow their territory for potential operations against Iran. Maritime incidents reinforce the complexity of regional security calculations for all parties. For Iran, the detentions serve multiple signaling purposes. The message suggests that regional stability benefits from diplomatic accommodation rather than military confrontation that could affect all parties. Iran's maritime operations reflect classic diplomatic positioning before negotiations. The vessel detentions establish Iran's operational capacity ahead of talks in Oman, while maintaining legal justification. The operations demonstrate that Iran retains significant capabilities despite international pressure. This reality affects negotiating dynamics by illustrating the limitations of pressure-only approaches to complex regional issues. For the United States, the detentions illustrate the ongoing challenges of maritime security in the Gulf. Iran continues operating in critical waters despite U.S. naval presence, suggesting that sustainable solutions require comprehensive diplomatic engagement. The challenge for both sides is managing military and maritime activities in ways that support rather than undermine diplomatic progress. The question is whether current tensions create incentives for compromise or increase risks of miscalculation. Strait of Hormuz operations affect global energy markets beyond their immediate regional impact. Any perception of increased maritime risks in Gulf waters can influence oil prices and shipping insurance calculations. Iran's control over vessel movements, whether for anti-smuggling or other purposes, demonstrates the interconnection between regional security and global economic systems. This dynamic affects decision-making in multiple capitals. The economic dimension provides Iran with influence that extends beyond its military capabilities. The potential for supply disruption affects energy-dependent economies worldwide, creating stakeholders in regional stability beyond immediate parties. For major energy importers, including China and European economies, maritime security in the Gulf carries particular significance. Regional stability affects global supply chains that extend far beyond Middle Eastern borders. Iranian state media frames vessel detentions as legitimate law enforcement against smuggling operations. International maritime law permits coastal states to enforce their laws within territorial waters and economic zones. Iran's claims about illegal fuel smuggling, if substantiated, would provide legal justification for vessel seizures and crew detention. The emphasis on judicial procedures attempts to establish legal rather than purely military framing. However, the pattern of such detentions, their timing relative to diplomatic developments, and Iran's broader regional tensions create questions about multiple motivations for maritime operations. The legal complexity illustrates challenges of operating in contested maritime environments where legitimate law enforcement, strategic signaling, and international tensions intersect in ways that affect interpretation. The IRGC's reported months of surveillance before the detentions suggests systematic monitoring of maritime activities in Iranian waters. This capability serves both law enforcement and strategic intelligence purposes. Iran's ability to track vessel movements over extended periods demonstrates maritime domain awareness that extends beyond immediate anti-smuggling operations. The same systems monitor various types of shipping and naval activity. The intelligence dimension affects regional security calculations for multiple actors. Surveillance capabilities that identify smuggling operations can also monitor military deployments and commercial shipping patterns throughout the Gulf. For the United States and regional partners, Iran's monitoring systems complicate operational planning and create awareness that activities in Gulf waters face persistent observation from Iranian intelligence networks. The vessel detentions represent the latest in a pattern of Iranian maritime operations stretching back years. Previous incidents have involved various vessel types under different legal justifications. The consistency suggests deliberate policy rather than opportunistic actions. Iran uses maritime operations to maintain presence and assert authority regardless of broader diplomatic or military developments in the region. For shipping companies and insurance providers, the pattern creates ongoing risk calculations that affect routing decisions and insurance costs. The potential for detention, under various justifications, influences commercial maritime planning. The cumulative effect establishes Iranian operational control over Gulf waters as a persistent factor that all maritime actors must consider in their planning and risk assessments. Iran's detention of 2 vessels near Farsi Island demonstrates Tehran's ongoing maritime operations in critical Gulf waters. Iranian state media says the vessels were carrying smuggled fuel, with over 1 million liters seized and 15 crew members handed over to judicial authorities. The IRGC described its Gulf operations as comprehensive, reflecting Iran's assertion of operational control over strategic waterways. The detentions occur near Farsi Island, where Iran maintains major naval presence. The timing, as US-Iran nuclear talks in Oman approach, adds diplomatic context to what Tehran presents as routine anti-smuggling enforcement. Iran demonstrates operational capabilities while maintaining legal justification based on fuel smuggling allegations. Some analysts and state-linked reporting offer scenarios about regional conflict dynamics, projecting how proxy networks, cyber capabilities, and geographic advantages might factor into broader regional tensions. These remain analytical frameworks rather than confirmed operational plans. The vessel detentions showcase maritime capabilities that affect regional calculations for all parties. The Strait of Hormuz operations remind stakeholders that Iran retains significant operational presence regardless of international pressure or diplomatic developments. As nuclear negotiations approach, the maritime operations establish Iran's continued capacity in strategic waters while attempting to maintain legal justification. The question is whether such activities support diplomatic progress or increase risks